The barn had always been my refuge from loneliness until one night when a simple moment with our horse shattered everything. What started as a normal evening with my husband away on another business trip turned into something unthinkable. I never expected to cross that line. Shadow, our chestnut stallion, a male who constantly mated with other horses and still had that desire, had always been my calming presence. But that night, there was a shift, something in the air that made the barn feel alive in a way I couldn't explain. And in that silence, I did something I couldn't take back. My life with my husband had become predictable, even comfortable, but beneath the surface, something was shifting, a hollow I couldn't ignore. He was distant, always gone. So, I turned to the horses, seeking an escape. But what I found that night in the barn with Shadow changed everything. It started innocently enough. When my husband was away, I found myself in the barn, seeking the horses' company. Shadow, my husband's horse, stood in the stall one evening, his eyes dark and knowing. I whispered, "Hey there," unsure, but he responded. It was instant, a bond one couldn't explain. As my husband's absences grew, I found peace with Shadow. Brushing him, riding him, it became the only time I felt truly alive. The rhythmic gallop, the wind, the pounding hooves, it was my escape from the emptiness. But after one ride, something shifted. I didn't want to leave him. I ran my hands over his coat, lingering. He didn't pull away. He leaned into me. The energy between us, quiet but undeniable, buzzed in the air. I knew then this was more than I had ever imagined. It wasn't just an emotional connection anymore. The tension between us grew with each visit. I couldn't explain it, but I felt him in every part of me. Shadow was no longer just a horse, he was my other half. Every time my husband left, I went to him. When my husband returned, the distance between us was impossible to ignore. One night, the pull was too strong. I entered the dark barn, moonlight filtering through the cracks. Shadow was waiting. As I touched his mane, I felt a jolt of something deeper. My heart raced, and for the first time, I didn't want to stop. I couldn't explain what was happening, but I couldn't resist it either. It wasn't a one-time thing. The more my husband was away, the more I found myself drawn back. I tried to tell myself it was a mistake, a moment of confusion, but it wasn't. It was a need, a craving that grew stronger with every visit. Shadow was no longer just a horse. He had become my obsession, my secret. Even when I wasn't with him, his presence haunted me. In the silence of my days, I thought of him, his coat gleaming, his muscles rippling beneath his skin. The connection between us was undeniable, like a force pulling me in, no matter how much I tried to resist. It wasn't the physical closeness that kept me coming back. It was the silence between us, the unspoken understanding. Shadow didn't need words to make me feel seen, to make me feel understood. And he wanted it. He knew. Every touch, every glance sent heat through my body, and I couldn't stop it. No matter how many times I tried to tell myself I was being ridiculous, that I was just lonely, I kept returning to the barn. It wasn't just that my husband was away, it was that I didn't want anyone else. I wanted Shadow. That night, after everything had changed between us, I couldn't sleep. My husband had returned, but something felt hollow. As he lay beside me, his steady breathing only amplified the chaos in my mind. I couldn't escape the memory of Shadow, his warmth, his rhythm. I slipped out of bed and stood by the window, staring at the barn. The moonlight bathed the field, and I felt torn between my life with my husband and this strange new world with Shadow. The bond between us pulsed in the air, lingering like a magnet I couldn't resist. I tried to push it away, but it wouldn't let me. The silence in the bed felt suffocating, and the love I once believed in now felt distant. My husband was a good man, but in that moment, I didn't care. The next day, when my husband left, I didn't hesitate. I moved quickly, driven by something deep inside me. I had to go to the barn. I couldn't stop now. I found Shadow waiting for me, as always. His sleek coat, muscles shifting beneath his skin, and eyes locked onto mine with a longing that matched the ache in my chest. Words weren't necessary. I walked toward him, breath shallow, heart pounding. My hands trembled as I reached for his mane, and when I touched him, electricity shot through me. Every nerve in my body came alive, every fiber attuned to him. He nickered softly, inviting me closer. I didn't hesitate. My hands roamed over his coat, the warmth of his body seeping into my fingers. The world outside the barn seemed to disappear as I focused on him. The tension between us thickened, palpable. I pressed my body against his side, feeling his heat radiate into me. Shadow shifted, nuzzling my neck, his breath warm against my skin, sending a wave of heat through me. I wanted more. Without thinking, I touched his face, grazing his lips. And then it happened. Shadow leaned in, his nostrils flaring, his heartbeat echoing against mine. Time seemed to stop. The world outside the barn ceased to exist. I don't know where the line blurred, but suddenly I wasn't just standing there anymore. My body pressed closer, hands moving without thought. The sensation of his muscles beneath my touch made my breath catch, and I couldn't stop myself. Every instinct screamed for more. I was lost, consumed by it. Then, as suddenly as it began, I pulled away. My chest heaved, breath ragged, and the warmth of Shadow's body filled the space around me. I was exposed, vulnerable. My heart hammered, body trembling with aftershocks. But I knew this for sure, there was no turning back. The line I had crossed wasn't just physical. It was in my heart, my mind erased forever. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Shadow's presence haunted me, his warmth, the way my body had responded. It wasn't a fleeting moment of madness, it was real, and it had only deepened. My husband was away again, but even when he was home, I wasn't really there. My mind was consumed with thoughts of the barn, of Shadow. It was as if something inside me had awakened, and I couldn't silence it. The yearning grew with every day, and I found myself visiting the barn more and more, even when my husband was around. I made excuses, anything to escape to Shadow. There was a pull now, something undeniable. Every time I walked into the barn, I entered a world where only Shadow and I existed, where everything else faded away. But tonight, something was different. Shadow wasn't in his usual stall. Panic rose in my chest as I called his name. There was no response, only silence. My heart raced as I searched the barn, opening stalls, desperate to find him. Then I heard it, a low whinny. I followed the sound to the far end of the stable, where Shadow stood, head lowered as if lost in thought. When he saw me, his eyes brightened, and he trotted toward me, his hooves echoing in the barn. I froze, watching him approach, and when he reached me, he nuzzled me gently, as if to reassure me. I reached up to touch his mane, my hands trembling, and his warmth filled me, radiating through my chest. I closed my eyes, standing there, feeling the moment shift inside me. A quiet desire, a need I couldn't escape. My hand gently stroked his neck, the muscle rippling beneath my fingers, and the closeness between us felt suffocating, but in the best way. The space between us seemed to vanish, and for a heartbeat, it was as if Shadow and I became one, connected on a level beyond the physical. Our bond had grown so deep that I couldn't tell where I ended and he began. Every thought, every emotion I had, he responded to, and in turn, I could feel him, each breath, each movement. It was as if we were communicating without words. I moved closer, my body pressing against his, my hand trailing down his side. His warmth melted away every doubt. There was no need for words. There was only us, bound by something unspoken but undeniable. I stopped asking myself why this was happening. There was no point anymore. Shadow shifted, his chest pressing against mine, and a rush of emotions hit me hard. His breath was hot against my skin, sending waves through me. My hands skimmed over his coat, feeling the smoothness of his muscles beneath. My heartbeat picked up, and the tension between us was electric. It wasn't just physical, there was something deeper. Shadow wasn't just an animal, he was my equal. He understood me in ways no one else could, and I, him. Our eyes locked, and a jolt passed between us, deeper than I could describe. His warmth, his energy, his very being, it was like we were one. I couldn't deny it anymore. My hands grabbed for his mane, pulling him closer, my body aching for him. He responded, his body pressing against mine with an intensity that made my pulse race. We were no longer two separate entities, we were bound. But just as quickly as it flared, guilt hit me. What the hell was I doing? What had I become? I pulled away, breathless, trembling, unsure. Shame crashed over me. I couldn't face him. I stumbled back, hands shaking, trying to clear my mind. Shadow stood still, watching me, as if he understood the storm inside me. I didn't know how to stop this. How to escape the strange pull between us. I couldn't go back. No matter how much I tried to tell myself I could, deep down I knew I was no longer the person I used to be. I'd crossed a line, one that could never be undone. And what scared me the most? I wasn't sure I wanted to go back. I was spiraling, lost in a world I didn't know how to navigate. The pull to Shadow was magnetic, but it came with a darkness I couldn't escape. It was like walking into a maze with no exit, no way out of what I had let happen. And the worst part? Every part of me, my body, mind, soul, was pulling me back, deeper into that maze, deeper into Shadow's orbit. The guilt was there, suffocating at times, but when Shadow was close, nuzzling my neck, brushing against me, it would fade. In those moments, the guilt seemed insignificant, drowned out by the magnetic pull between us. With him, the world made sense in a way nothing else did. There was no noise, no judgment, just us. But I couldn't keep living in this secret world. The tension between Shadow and me was growing, and I could feel it in my bones. The fake life I built with my husband was falling apart. I kept pretending everything was normal, but I knew he was starting to notice. The shift in my eyes, the energy I radiated whenever Shadow was near, it couldn't be hidden anymore. One evening, my husband confronted me. His eyes, full of quiet suspicion, searched mine. "What's going on?" His voice was low, calm, but the question hung in the air, suffocating us both. I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to confess everything, but I couldn't shatter the illusion. "I don't know what you mean," I said, my voice colder than I intended. My heart raced, hands trembling. He stepped closer, his voice soft but firm. "You've been different. This isn't you." I couldn't answer. I felt like a stranger to myself. "I've been fine," I lied, "just stressed." He didn't buy it. He left without a word, and the silence was suffocating. I could hear him downstairs, trying to piece it together. I wanted to run to Shadow, but I stayed, unable to escape just yet. Days passed, and I couldn't keep pretending. The pull to Shadow was undeniable. One afternoon, when my husband left, I went to the barn. Shadow's eyes locked with mine, and the connection between us crackled. As I touched his mane, desire surged through me. My thoughts scattered, emotions raw, uncontrollable. Suddenly, I heard footsteps. My heart stopped, panic surging through me. I pulled away, gasping for air, glancing around the barn. But it wasn't my husband. It was something else, something that froze me in place. Shadow's eyes were wide, his body tense, yet the connection between us didn't break. It felt like time stopped, the world holding its breath. Then came the unmistakable sound of the barn door creaking open. My husband was home early. My blood ran cold. I wasn't caught physically, but emotionally. There was no going back. My heart pounded as I heard his footsteps draw closer. No more lies, no more pretending. The truth, the consequences, were closing in. When my husband stepped into the barn, I couldn't look at him. He stood there, silent for a long moment, then spoke. "I knew something was wrong," he said, his voice steady. I didn't want to believe it, but now I understand. I faced him, my heart heavy with shame. The man I had promised myself to, the one I had once loved, stood there, and I had betrayed him. "I never wanted this," I whispered, barely able to speak the words, but it had happened. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The pain in his eyes said it all. There was no fixing what was broken, no undoing the damage I'd done with Shadow. The story was over, irreversible. My world had shifted, twisted, and broken in ways I couldn't comprehend, and in that moment, as the silence between us stretched, I realized that no matter what came next, there was no going back to what I had once known. Everything had changed. Thank you for taking the time to dive into this journey with me. If you found yourself captivated by this story, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more twists, turns, and untold truths. Your support means the world, and the next chapter awaits, one that might just be even more unpredictable than the last.